Carissa says she's recently started researching trauma bonds and Stockholm syndrome, and I am interested in Dana's perspective on it. So, yes, a lot of this, really kind of the core, I think, of Stockholm syndrome and of trauma bonds has a lot to do with this whole like intermittent reinforcement. So, which is basically if a person has a bunch of bad behavior and then that's interrupted with little like crumbs of good behavior followed by bad behavior, then it's that promise of, well, if I can keep kind of altering what I'm doing, basically walking on eggshells, if I can somehow change my behavior, then maybe I can control my environment. And so maybe then I can control getting more good behavior. That maybe if I just, lose weight, cook better meals, I'm more attentive, I, do all of I quit bringing up that I have issues with their behavior, that somehow is going to make my partner stop cheating on me, stop yelling at me, stop, hitting me, stop doing whatever. So that has a lot to do with kind of the whole Stockholm syndrome trauma bond thing. The trauma bonds, I think sorry, that was very strange sound. I think how a lot of people tend to describe the feeling of a trauma bond in an abusive relationship is that it's an emotional roller coaster. So it's when the good times are good, they're really good. But when the bad times are bad, they're really bad. And normal relationships don't run that pattern. Normal relationships don't have, fairy tale good times followed by hellish nightmare bad times. That's kind of a good way to tell, kind of what's going on. And oftentimes it's hard for a person to leave because the good times can be so good, so like over the top good, like, oh my gosh, this person surprised us with a trip to Disneyland, or this person sent me a dozen roses at work, or this person, the chemistry between us is unlike anything I've ever felt before. And so there's this, it's easy to confuse intensity with love or with sincerity, because it's often confused. A lot of people, even especially I think other people that are watching this relationship, they'll look at these acts of intensity and say, well, this person must be sincerely remorseful. Look at all of the great lengths they're going to. I mean, they're willing to go to, they're here in therapy, so they must be really wanting to change because they're actually here in therapy. Or they came to my door in the middle of the night crying, saying that they would do anything to make it work. And obviously this person's sincere because look at how intense their emotions are. Look at the levels that they're going to in order to show how remorseful they are. But the reality is the only sincere apology is changed behavior. So if a person's behavior doesn't change for long, then they're not truly remorseful. So, but again, like when you're in the middle of this, it's so confusing because here we are. You're like nose deep in feelings and in emotions and this emotional connection to this other person, and trying to make sense of this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde that you're seeing. This, the Mr. Hyde is the guy. He's the or the girl, the fun, the charming, the lovable, the likable, really great person. But the Dr. Jekyll, or I should say the Dr. Jekyll is the charming, charismatic one, but the Mr. Hyde, that dark side is awful. That's the side that's incredibly abusive. And so there's a lot more that goes into, I think, trauma bonds than just the bond itself. There tends to be a lot of outward pressure with friends and family and people at church and even therapists and all kinds of people who are confusing intensity with sincerity. And those are not the same things at all. Remember, sincerity, the only sincere apology is changed behavior. That's it. That's it. Anything less than that, they're not ready, willing, and able to change, or you're being manipulated. Kind of one of the two. So that's kind of trauma bonds. And two, let me add something having to do with trauma bonds. Because it's this level of intensity, it can really prime a person over time to confuse intensity with love, to confuse intensity with sincerity. So when people get out of these emotional roller coaster relationships, because the breakups are awful, but then the makeups are just tend to be very off the charts. Normal relationships can feel really flat and really boring after this, because chemically and emotionally and everything else, we've been primed to confuse that intensity with sincerity. And so it takes a person a little while to kind of get used to what does a normal relationship feel like, and why, and people often ask, like, why am I just not attracted to a normal person? What's wrong with me? Why am I only attracted to narcissists? And that's a big part of it. Is narcissists, they tend to come on strong, they come on hot and heavy. It's oftentimes like fish jumping into the boat. Like they are just all in right away. And initially it can feel really nice to be like, wow, this person's not playing games at all. They're just immediately so into me. And which can feel really nice if you've been in an abusive relationship before, thinking, I just don't want to play games. Here this person is, they're very quick to make me their whole world and to, tell me they're so good to me. And so it can really be hard to sort out the difference between like love bombing and love, and intensity and sincerity, and control with caring. I see that one a lot too, where people will say, oh, well, he or she just really wants to know where I am all the time, or they want me to call when I get home from work, and then they want me to call before I go to bed, and then they want me to call first thing in the morning, and they're always texting me, and they're so concerned. And it's control. But when things kind of get scrambled up, if we've been in this crazy making dynamic for a long time, all of this stuff just gets blurred and jumbled. So that's kind of trauma bonds. Stockholm syndrome is along the same lines. So Stockholm syndrome is a term that came from an actual bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden. This was about, I think, like in the 60s maybe? And I forget how many hostages there were. I think there was like 7 or something. And they were held hostage at gunpoint for several days in this bank. When they got released, what they found was that a few of the hostages were very defensive about their captors. And one of them actually ended up marrying one of the bank robbers. Another one helped to raise funds for their legal defense. And so these different psychologists were examining this and like, what is going on here? Here are these people that held them at gunpoint, that had this really scary, awful behavior, and yet these hostages were defending them. And what they were finding out was it was the whole kind of intermittent reinforcement. So yes, while there was this level of fear and intimidation and potential violence and control and all of these awful things, if they were showing them periods of kindness, like, okay, you can go to the bathroom now, or we're gonna let you, here's some food, or you can go get some water, or you can talk to the person next to you, these kinds of things, people were so terrified that any little act of kindness they were clinging onto, and it was a way for them, it was like they were bonding and empathizing with their captors. So how this pertains to an abusive relationship is, I think a lot of people, myself included, tend to get confused. They tend to not spot an abusive situation because we all have this idea of what an abusive situation looks like and what an abusive person looks like and how they act like. In, a lot of this is the imagery that we see. So, for example, the movie Sleeping with the Enemy. Here you have Julia Roberts, who was married to the character in the movie, who was this really dark, brooding, scary guy who never smiled, and he was, just real serious and very overt, very outwardly problematic. Like you could see this guy coming, and he didn't seem to ever have any like niceness to him. Like he was a scary dude from start to finish. There was nothing, there was no charm, there was no likability, he never smiled. He just was a scary dude the whole movie. Abusive people are very, very rarely like that. If anything, they oftentimes tend to be the exact opposite. They tend to be very charismatic and likable. Again, like other people misinterpret their behavior. They misinterpret the controlling as caring. They misinterpret the love bombing as love. They misinterpret the intensity with sincerity. They misinterpret the charm for, or I should say, the manipulations for being kind and considerate and compassionate. So it gets really kind of tangled up with people get tangled up in this, and that's why. So because abusive people aren't 100% rotten 100% of the time, because they're people, right? So they might have a really great sense of humor, or they might be really intelligent, or they might be, good to animals, or they might volunteer, or they might have certain redeeming qualities about them. For those that are experiencing them, it can be very confusing. Like, well, this person can't, can't be abusive because look at all, they're so active in their church, or they go to all of their daughter's softball games, and they're the first in line to help if you need anything. So how could that person possibly be abusive? But again, just like the bank robber scenario, abusive people are rarely 100% abusive 100% of the time. So I hope that kind of clears some things up. One thing that does help, break those trauma bonds and to get out of that cycle and to see things clearly, because I think it's that trying to reconcile the two different sides of this person. What am I dealing with here? Is this Dr. Jekyll or is it Mr. Hyde? And is this normal? And I guess nobody's perfect. And I guess I should forgive and forget. And like, what am I dealing with? To write it out, write out what you're seeing that's problematic, because it's the problematic stuff that we need to focus on. That's what's important to look for as far as what's deal breaker stuff. And when you're writing out stuff that you're seeing, I think it can also be really helpful because people often ask, well, what's the difference between an abusive relationship and like a normal relationship? And if you start writing it out, I think you'll be able to tell the difference, because an abusive relationship is a relationship that includes abuse. A normal relationship does not include abuse, period. So there's 7 different types of abuse out there. There's verbal, there's emotional, there's verbal, emotional, psychological, physical, sexual, financial, and spiritual. And none of those elements are present in a quote-unquote normal relationship. They for sure are not present in a healthy relationship. So I think it can help to familiarize yourself with what each of these different types of abuse looks like. And of course, to an abusive person, or a person that's been in a series of abusive relationships, they might think to themselves, oh, well, like, really? Because nobody's perfect. But while nobody's perfect, that doesn't make abusive behavior okay. And it definitely doesn't make abusive behavior, normal, because it's not. There's plenty of people out there that don't have abusive behavior. So even though we might have been around our fair share of it, right? It doesn't, so it might not be, it might seem like, well, we kind of grew up with some of this stuff, or I've been in a lot of relationships with this kind of stuff, but it's not normal. And people that tend to be in abusive relationships tend to have a really high tolerance for stuff that should be deal breaker stuff. So it's worth looking at and asking yourself, what are my deal breakers? And getting crystal clear on that. So in any relationship, we have deal breakers. That's a bare minimum. Like, that's a good foundation of which to start from. What are your deal breaker behaviors? And then outside of that, what are your must-haves? And then what are your nice-to-haves? So there's kind of three elements at play there that I think once you get clarity on that, then you can see how they all come together. So once you know your deal breaker stuff, and I've mentioned this before, I think just it helps to just kind of have perspective with things. But for me, it's abuse, addiction, adultery, or attitude would be deal breaker stuff. Like, bare minimum, that's a no go. Any type of abuse, I'm gone. I don't care if they, and it's funny because there's going to be people that are watching this video that are going to think, whoa, that sounds really extreme. And then there's also going to be people watching this video that are going to think, yeah, like, isn't that like common knowledge? Isn't that pretty basic? It just depends on, I think, what you've experienced and what you've been accustomed to tolerating in your life. So, open, honest. So, okay, so let me back up. So those are deal breaker stuff. Some stuff that is a must-have. So for me, open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication. That's an absolute must-have. If that's not there, then there's nothing there. Being treated with dignity and respect at all times. You can still fight with a person and treat them with dignity and respect. You can still disagree with somebody and treat them with dignity and respect. So, honesty, obviously, is a huge one. Trust. And again, trust is something that's earned. It's not something that's blindly given. I think that's another area where a lot of us don't have clarity on that. We're very quick. We tend to think other people are like us, and we take them at face value. And so we rush into things. And it's easy for us to get caught up in those whirlwind romances when you've got somebody that seems like, again, we're mistaking that intensity for sincerity. And so we're getting caught up in this whirlwind thinking, well, they seem so interested in me, they seem so perfect, we just have so much in common, and that whirlwind picks up speed. And, next thing that happens is that whirlwind turns into a tornado, and then you're picking up the pieces of your life. But I digress. So there's the deal breakers, there's the things that are must-haves, and then there's the things that are nice to have. And then that's where it tends to vary from person to person. So is it nice to have a person that, let's say you're a musician, is it a nice to have if that other person's also really passionate about music? Probably. But if you're really into music, that might be a must-have for you. If you're, let's see, another nice to have might be, somebody that really is passionate about animals. But if you have a bunch of animals, that might be a must. Like, yeah, you really gotta like animals if you like me, because I have 10 dogs and 14 cats. So, I'm just saying, I don't. I would love that, but I don't. But if somebody did, then that would be important for them. But let me back up a little bit. When I was talking about deal breakers and I'd mentioned attitude, A big part of attitude is that openness, that honesty, that trust. It's how they handle conflict, how they handle stress, how they handle, you know, how are they accountable for their actions? Are they, you know, do you feel comfortable bringing things up with them? Are they treating you with dignity and respect? Lots of love to you guys. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this.